For a long time now, DC Comics has really struggled to make a universe that competes with the MCU. They've gone almost the entirety of the duration of the superhero movie fad without producing any significant results. Now, that problem seems to be going away as people lose interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's intent on nosediving into oblivion with poor to awful movies. So fortunately for DC, the gap between Marvel and DC movies is shortening, even if it's due to no effort on their part. And yet, before the imminent reboot of the DC film franchise, before the Justice League, before the age of the failed DCCU, before Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, there was an expansive and very popular DC universe on screen. The DC Animated Universe. Culminating in one of the best cartoons I have ever watched, Justice League Unlimited, the universe is a large part of the childhood of many of us who grew up in the 90s and 2000s. There are plenty of great pieces to this universe. Static Shock, Justice League Unlimited, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond. But there was one that really helped define the shape of this universe and acted as the cornerstone for the whole thing. And that would be Batman the Animated Series. This show found critical acclaim and wide popularity as it moved on to become one of the founding members of the DC Animated Universe that would run for over a decade and depict some of the best renditions of its characters outside of the original comics. For that, and many other reasons, Batman the Animated Series holds a place as one of the greatest cartoons ever made. That's not a joke, and I'm not the only one who says that. Wizard Magazine ranked it the second greatest animated TV production of all time. IGN lauded it as the best adaptation of Batman anywhere outside the comics, the best comic book television show in all time, and the second best animated show of all time. To add even more to the acclaim, TV Guide listed it as one of the 7 greatest cartoons ever made. And to add some backing to those claims, Batman the Animated Series won 4 Emmys, showing you just how great this series actually was at its time. Now, unfortunately, the critical acclaim doesn't really mean much nowadays because critics have completely destroyed their reputation and have proven that they are no longer needed. But that doesn't change the fact that this show defined the early DC animated universe and helped spawn the other creations in that area. More to the point of this video, Batman the Animated Series provides superb storytelling, a great look both to the art and to Gotham, and an excellent renditions and voicing of characters that are involved. I mean, case in point, this Kevin Conroy voiced version of Batman is it is the single best depiction of Batman outside of the comics. The voicing really is superb. With Kevin Conroy as Batman and Mark Hamill as the Joker, this series has 2 of the most iconic representations of the voices of characters in the Batman franchise, who would then go on to be a part of the other and almost equally beloved Batman Arkham franchise. To say this show was big would be a bit of an understatement. It was so iconic, it became such a huge piece of the Batman name that it actually had influences on the comics themselves. Certain narrative choices and original characters were so well received, they eventually ended up being canonized in the comics. Now, there's quite a lot of little things to discuss here with this series, because unlike a lot of the stuff I've covered so far on my channel, there is no definitive through-line story that opens and closes Batman the Animated Series. Rather, like a lot of American cartoons of the era, this show is a bunch of smaller stories threaded together by common characters, places, and themes. And honestly, I think this method has its advantages and disadvantages in some cases. In the case of a lot of manga and anime, where there is a definitive story defining the backbone of the series that tends to lend it some level of direction, plotting, and super deep development, these sorts of cartoons have the option of almost infinite longevity. Case in point, One Piece, Naruto, Jujutsu Kaisen, My Hero Academia all have defining plots that carry out through the entirety of the show rather than just in itty-bitty little episodes. They have a defined end and a goal to work towards. And to that end, they can really dig deep and get a lot of detail in there surrounding that one thing. On the other hand, that means there is already a defined limit to what the story can give you. Once it's done, it's done. unless you decide to give it the Boruto treatment. The advantage of this American form of cartoon storytelling is that so long as they continue to receive support and funding, they can continue indefinitely and don't have to worry about an expiration date due to narrative devices. The disadvantage of these smaller stories, though, is that there's only so much you can do before things start to feel really rushed. There's only so much character development and detail you can add in before it really feels like you're just trying to cram a bunch of developments into a single episode. As a result, things not might feel as deep or as impactful as something with a through-line plot, with permanent developments, with things that alter the course of the whole narrative. In other words, it hampers the use of long-term plot twists and reduces the impact of massive betrayals or narrative-shifting information. Now, to be fair, the latter end of the DC animated universe, Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, employed larger plots that took up entire seasons, and allowed for more intricate and detailed storytelling. But none of this is being said to discredit the storytelling of Batman the Animated Series. In fact, it's actually pretty good. You see, this Batman cartoon works well within its time constraints, delivering complete, effective, and efficient stories in what little time it has to give them to you. And as a result, it doesn't risk overcomplicating things. It's sweet, short, and to the point. Now, yes, the stories are comparatively simple compared to something like Berserk or One Piece, but this was a show meant for kids. And for stories that are condensed down to 20 to 40 minute packets, they are surprisingly well structured. They manage to give you the background, the supporting information, and a resolution all in 1 to 2 episodes. And the vast majority of them are really good episodes. That doesn't mean that this show is without its permanent developments, though. And sometimes tiny little details or small changes can have lasting effects on everything that happens in Batman the Animated Series. An example of the larger narratives constructed within Batman the Animated Series can be found in stuff like Ra's al Ghul. While, yes, they do all tie together into a broader narrative, they don't shape something that absolutely changes the whole course of the show, or acts as a defining story arc. You're not getting something like the whole Chunin exams from Naruto. Instead, what you're getting is a smaller plot that sort of defines the tension between Batman, Ra's al Ghul, and Talia, as Ra's tries to depopulate the Earth and return it to its natural state. Meanwhile, Batman and Talia have to deal with their romantic tension while also being on opposite sides of this battle. These stories tend to contain information that changes your lasting impression of the characters. Stuff like information on Ra's al Ghul's immortality, his family, and so on and so forth. So, with all of that said, we can effectively sum it up as shorter doesn't necessarily mean inferior. But if we're talking about how this story does have lasting and impactful changes, I think the transformation of Harvey Dent to Two-Face is one of the more impactful events to talk about. I mean, Harvey Dent starts out as one of Batman's good friends, and Bruce has to kind of watch this guy succumb to his instability and be manipulated into becoming the monster and gangster that would eventually be Two-Face. Bruce takes on some level of guilt for this, because it's all catalyzed by an accident that burns part of Harvey's face, which he was unable to prevent. At this point, Harvey Dent as a character is replaced by Two-Face, the more aggressive and brutal instincts inside him that he's been suppressing since he was a kid. So just because this show doesn't have a narrative backbone to work off of, does not mean that the series is completely disconnected. And that's one of the most incredible things about this show. Each of the 1 to 2 episode arcs is independent of the others, so that you can jump in at any point and not feel entirely lost. But at the same time, they're also tied together with what few threads remain. There are still actions, choices, and emotions that affect characters in the way they interact with each other throughout the whole thing, even though there's no big connecting through-line story to tie all that stuff into a central narrative. And of course, it all totals to the right experience for a Batman show. Like you're watching the exploits of a character who stands on principle, rather than the pursuits of a character who has a goal in mind, something they want to achieve. Batman is motivated by his principles, and that leads him to this never-ending fight against crime, where he will, until the day he's too old to move, continue to fight back against the evil that is plaguing Gotham. the things that hurt him when he was a child. And in spite of all the compact stories, you still get a good amount of character development and you get to see who people really are. Because the show hyper focuses on select instances rather than on a bunch of things all at a time. And it gives you the chance to actually get invested in the characters who are involved in the story. Another thing that Batman the Animated Series does fantastically well is balancing the childish fun and the more mature aspects of the show. Batman the Animated Series stood out as somewhat darker than its previous iterations, because it used actual firearms, depicted characters actually getting hurt. It still depicts Bruce Wayne as a playboy and a bit of a womanizer, while still also being entirely appropriate for children. It was a far more fitting take on The Dark Knight, and on Gotham as a whole. It becomes hard to capture the full extent of Batman's character when your ability to depict the darkness that he is surrounded by and constantly fighting against is too limited. And yet Bruce Timm still finds a way to depict the city of Gotham and the reason for Batman to exist. Crime and decay plague the city to no end, and corrupt city officials aid in the chaos that envelops the streets of Gotham. Many of the earlier iterations, and a few of the later iterations, made Batman seem like a gag character fighting comical villains for no stakes at all. But Batman the Animated Series gives you the feeling that this is a legitimate war against the criminal element plaguing Gotham. Everything about Gotham in this series feels right. The tall Gothic infrastructure, the eerie nighttime atmosphere, the vast swaths of abandoned or decaying civilization that prove to be a breeding ground for criminal activity. It proves to be a great depiction of a city rife with danger and criminal activity. And oh boy, does the art style really compound that effect. And then there's the things to be said about Batman himself in this series. Kevin Conroy is a great Batman and an excellent Bruce Wayne. Kevin Conroy's voice, on top of the best written version of Batman outside the comics, makes for an excellent experience. More often than not, you get these depictions of Batman that paint him as this neurotic mess of a man that's barely able to see anything other than his role as Batman and a dispenser of justice. If you want an example of what I'm talking about, just look at the Robert Pattinson or Ben Affleck versions that we got more recently. Most renditions tend to make him seem cold and ruthless and distant, a truly broken man, but it often fails to capture the good-natured side of him, the part that still wants to do good and holds him to his own rules. You see, Batman the Animated Series actually captures that side of the famed vigilante, and in no other places do you see it more than in the way he treats Harley Quinn in Scarface. With Harley Quinn, he consistently tries to reason with her, and to get her to come back to society and live a normal life. He tries to give her a path away from her abusive relationship with the Joker. He legitimately tries to give her a chance, and is kind to her when he's able to be. And in one instance, even goes out of his way to try and help her when she misunderstands the situation and becomes violent. With Scarface, he even goes so far as to offer Albert a job at his own company in hopes of getting the guy to rejoin society and live a normal life away from his schizophrenic personality that drove him to crime. Batman tries to help Victor Freeze save his wife. He tries to help Harvey recover from his condition. Even as Bruce Wayne, he does all he can to help banish the criminal element from the city, while also giving them a chance at rehabilitation and a better life. Batman is not just some traumatized dude who beats up criminals because his parents died in the past. He's someone who's actively working to prevent the tragedy that happened to him, and is working towards a brighter future. The compassionate and humane side of the character really shines through in this show. At times, he can be menacing and driven, but he can also be compassionate and capable of mercy. This version of Batman seems to understand that his city won't be saved just by punishing crime. It's saved by justice and redemption. But hey, how about some of those things that were so well liked about this series that they were eventually canonized into the comics? Harley Quinn was such a popular character in this show that she was eventually added into the comics as a result. The changes made to Dr. Freeze are another example of things that translated from this show back into the comics. Victor Freeze used to be a quirky mad scientist and ended up becoming a sort of tragic character, struggling to save his wife, but unable to. Batman the Animated Series truly is one of the greatest cartoons ever created. It defined an era of DC animation and helped kick off one of the best parts of the DC on-screen universes. Its well-structured storytelling, excellent artwork and design, excellent voice acting, and all-around solid structure make it an icon. This show stands as a testament to the creative skill of Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski, that even today it is considered one of the greatest cartoon shows ever aired. If you're a fan of some of the earlier superhero / comic book stuff that's been put out, the more mature writing, the complex themes, and the great overall storytelling make this an absolute blast to watch. Even in spite of being a kids show, it's still flippin' fantastic. It really is the best version of Batman ever put on screen. And the biggest shame of all of this is that Warner Bros. And the DC Cinematic Universe don't seem to be taking notes on what made this so successful. It's a 10 out of 10 series, and I'm not even touching Mask of the Phantasm yet, because that movie is fantastic. Pardon the pun. But hey, that's enough about me gushing about my favorite fictional character of all time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and comment. I do enjoy the interaction. Otherwise, have a great day. Later.